My grandfather's phone sent me a text message 3 weeks after he was buried. I was eating instant noodles in my rented apartment when it came through. February in Flint, Michigan, is brutally cold, and the radiator in my place wasn't putting out enough heat. I was wrapped in a blanket at the kitchen table, twirling noodles around my fork, half my brain still stuck on the passive-aggressive comments my supervisor had made at work that day. The phone buzzed, and I reached for it without thinking. Then I saw the name on the screen and the fork clattered right into the bowl. Papa. I stared at those 3 letters for a solid 10 seconds, my heart hammering against my ribs, a dull roar in my ears. My grandfather was William Harrison, a retired mechanic who'd lived in Flint, Michigan for 67 years. The day he died, I'd powered down his old flip phone with my own hands and put it in a drawer. That name had been in my contacts for over a decade. When he was alive, he called me twice a week, every week, like clockwork. But he wasn't alive anymore. The message was one line: "Come back to the house. There's something in the cigar box for you." I stared at the screen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, not knowing what to type back. Finally I pecked out, "Who is this?" No reply. I sent another, "How do you have my grandfather's phone?" Still nothing. I tried calling, but it went straight to voicemail, a robotic female voice telling me the number I'd dialed was powered off. I set the phone down on the table and stared at the ceiling for a long moment. My first thought was that my parents were behind it, but I dismissed that almost immediately. If they wanted to get their hands on the old house, they wouldn't use my grandfather's phone to send cryptic messages. They'd just get a lawyer and fight me outright. And honestly, neither of them had the imagination for this kind of convoluted scheme. My second thought was that my grandfather had set up a timed message before he passed. But he'd barely known how to use a smartphone. That flip phone was one I'd taught him to use, step by painful step. Scheduled texts were way beyond his skill set. My third thought made my skin crawl. I didn't let myself go there, because I knew it wasn't possible. I barely slept that night. At 3 in the morning I was still awake, scrolling through my phone, searching for information about scheduled texts and how they worked with different carriers. I turned up a few plausible explanations, but I needed to verify them. The next morning, I called in sick and drove out to Oak Street. Flint in winter has a way of freezing you right down to the marrow. Ice crusted the windshield as I drove, the wipers squeaking with every pass. Oak Street was lined with old houses, their front lawns dead and brown. I pulled up in front of the gray 2-story house and saw that the paint on the porch had peeled a little more since the last time I'd been there. The key still turned in the lock. I pushed the door open and a wave of stale, musty air hit me. The heat had been shut off for months, and the inside was nearly as cold as the outdoors. I stomped the snow off my boots in the foyer and looked around at the familiar furniture, the old plaid sofa, the lamp my grandfather had used for 20 years, the family photos on the wall. In one of them, he was younger, standing next to my grandmother Irene, both of them grinning like idiots. I'd been back twice since he died, just to pick up a few things he'd specifically told me to take. But I'd never gone through his study. He'd always kept that room off limits when he was alive, even with me. "It's a mess in there," he'd say. "You don't need to see that." Now I understood why. He'd been hiding things, making sure no one found them before he was ready. I went upstairs and pushed the door open. The study was smaller than I remembered. One wall was lined with a heavy oak bookcase stuffed with auto repair magazines and old paperback novels. A desk sat against the other wall, its surface filmed with dust. I could see handprints in the dust. Someone had been here after he died. I frowned, but filed that away for later. My attention was snagged by something on the bottom shelf of the bookcase. A brown leather cigar box, worn at the edges. I recognized it instantly. My grandfather had smoked cigars for 40 years, and that box had been with him for most of that time. I knelt down and pulled it out. Heavier than I expected. Definitely not just cigars. I opened the lid. On top lay a blue leather journal, its cover scuffed and faded. Beneath it, a stack of bank statements. Under those, a folded legal document that looked official. And at the very bottom, the corner of a cream-colored envelope, with handwriting on it. I picked up the journal first. I opened it to the first page and saw my grandfather's handwriting, crooked, cramped letters pressed together like a child's. September 3, 2017. Sent $3,000 to Cora's college account today. That girl is finally going to get her education. I was so happy I had an extra half bottle of whiskey tonight. Irene would have yelled at me if she were here, but I don't care. Worth it. My eyes burned. I remembered that money. It was my first semester's tuition. When I'd called my father and asked for help, he'd said, "Check with your grandfather, I'm a little tight right now." My grandfather had transferred the money the same day, no questions asked. I'd thought he had it to spare. It was only later I found out he'd quit a 30-year smoking habit to save up for my education. When I asked why he'd stopped, he just said, "Getting old, couldn't hack it anymore." Light as air. Never mentioned the tuition. I turned the page. February 14, 2018. Laura called, said their furnace broke and asked if I could lend her $2,000 for repairs. She said she'd pay me back next month. I transferred it. Drove past their street today and saw a brand new car in the driveway. Furnace. Right. Laura was my mother. I stared at those lines, my chest tight and heavy. My grandfather had never breathed a word of this to me. June 8, 2018. Laura called again. This time she said they'd take care of Cora's tuition from now on, and I should stop. I told her I'd been paying it all along. She said, "Dad, stop meddling in our family's business." I hung up and sat in the living room for an hour without moving. I kept asking myself when Cora became their family's business. That child is mine. March 2019. Mark came by today. Said he needed a new car and wanted me to pitch in $20,000. I told him I'd just paid Cora's tuition and I was tapped out. He left without even saying goodbye. Face like a slapped ass. I knelt on the cold floor, turning page after page. My grandfather's handwriting grew shakier as the entries went on. His hands must have been trembling more as time passed. But he missed nothing. Every dollar, every phone call, every cutting remark, he logged it all. Dates, amounts, context. Down to the penny. Halfway through the journal, I reached the section about his illness. May 12, 2020. Went to the hospital for results today. Doctor said pancreatic cancer, terminal. He asked if I had family with me. I said no. He told me to notify my relatives as soon as possible. I said I would. Sat on a bench outside the hospital and had a cigarette, haven't had one in years. I didn't call anyone. I drove home, sat down at my desk, and thought about Cora's tuition for the fall semester. It wasn't paid yet. June 2020. First round of chemo. Threw up all day. Nurse asked if anyone was waiting for me. I said no. She gave me a look, but didn't say anything else. Cora called that night and asked what I'd eaten for dinner. I said beef stew. I hadn't eaten a thing. She told me the cafeteria burgers at her school were terrible. Listening to her voice made everything better. August 2020. Laura heard I was sick and came to the hospital. I thought she was actually visiting me. 10 minutes in, she started asking about the house. She said, "Dad, this place must be worth a lot now. You should write a will so there's no fighting later." I told her I already had. She asked what was in it. I said guess. She turned green. Stomped out in her heels. My hands were shaking as I turned the page. While my grandfather was lying in a hospital bed, hooked up to chemo, my mother was interrogating him about his will. And where was I? At school. In the dining hall. Complaining about my term papers. My grandfather never told me a single thing about any of this. October 2020. Changed my will today. The old one left the house to Laura and Mark. I rewrote the whole thing. My lawyer asked if I was sure. I told him I'd lived 70 years and there were only two things I'd ever been certain about: marrying Irene, and this decision. After Irene died, Cora was my only family. Her parents don't deserve that name. January 2021. Chemo isn't working as well as we'd hoped. Doctor told me to prepare myself. I didn't tell Cora. She's job hunting, she's got enough pressure. I called Daniel and asked him to come over. That boy's reliable. March 2021. Laura called again. More careful this time, tried to ask about family property in roundabout ways. I told her to wait until I died. She sputtered and said, "Dad, why are you so harsh?" I didn't answer. Harsh? Who was the one grilling me about my will from my hospital bed? June 2021. Cora visited today. She's lost weight but she was smiling, told me she got a permanent position. I wanted to hug her but I didn't have the strength. She paused at the door on her way out and looked back at me. I saw the same look in her eyes that Irene had when she knew she was going. She might have guessed. That girl's always been sharp. September 2021. Daniel finished organizing everything. I reviewed it all, there's nothing missing. Hamilton came by too. The will's finalized. I put the cigar box away on the bottom shelf. Cora will come looking for it eventually. She was always going through my things as a kid, just like me. November 2021. Threw up again today, but I don't even mind anymore. Getting used to it. Cora knitted me a scarf last week. Red. She said Flint's too cold, I needed to stay warm. I put it on. The heat's plenty high in here but I wear it anyway. Her knitting's always been a little wonky, but it's warm. The last entry was dated December 18, 2021. Less than 2 weeks before he died. Cora came today. Brought me chicken soup, said she'd simmered it for 4 hours. I took one sip. Too salty. But I finished every drop. She left and I cried. I never failed anyone in my life except this girl. She got stuck with those parents of hers, and when I'm gone, she'll have no real family left. But I can't stay. I left her everything I had. The house, the money, Daniel's files. Enough for her to get by. That girl's tougher than she thinks. She'll be fine. I closed the journal and crouched on the freezing floor, tears streaming onto the blue cover. I wasn't sobbing. Just silent tears, falling one after another onto the leather. I wasn't crying out of sadness for myself. I was crying because I finally understood what my grandfather had done in those final months. He was alone in that hospital room, going through chemo, planning everything down to the smallest detail so I'd have a way forward. And me? I visited once or twice a week and thought I was doing enough. I wiped my face and set the journal aside. I picked up the stack of bank statements, thumbing through them one by one. My eyes widened with every page. My grandfather had more money saved than I'd ever imagined. But what really hit me was that every withdrawal he'd ever made to my parents was circled in red pen, with a note in the margin, to be repaid. Aside from nearly $120,000 in savings across 3 accounts, my parents had borrowed over $47,000 from him over the years. Every single transaction was backed by a paper trail. Dates, amounts, what it was supposedly for. His records were as meticulous as a professional ledger. Under the statements, I found the envelope. Cream-colored. In my grandfather's handwriting, for Cora, if I go first. I opened it. His handwriting was even shakier here, the letters pressed hard into the paper, like he'd used every ounce of strength he had left. Cora, if you're reading this, I'm probably gone. Don't be too sad. Everyone has their time. I've lived a long life, I got more than my share. Keep everything in the cigar box. The journal is yours. Take the accounts to Daniel Morris, he's a solid accountant, I've entrusted everything to him. The deed and the deposit certificates are in the false bottom of the box. You'll find them when you lift the lining. Your parents will cause you trouble. I know them too well. My biggest failure in life was not raising them better. But they're still your parents, so I'm leaving the choice to you. If you want to avoid the fight, sell the house and take the money and go somewhere else. Don't let them drag you down. But if you don't want to back down, there's a business card at the bottom of the box. Daniels. I had him track every penny your parents borrowed from me over the past 5 years. Take it to him, he'll help you. One thing you need to remember, Cora, you never owed them anything. I raised you, not them. I paid your tuition, not them. How many times did they come see you over the years? You know the answer better than I do. Don't carry their garbage for them. One last thing. Don't hate them. Hate is exhausting. You have a whole life ahead of you. Don't waste it on that. But don't let them push you around either. Your grandfather never had much in this world, but what I had, I left to you. You deserve better than what you got. Go live your life. I unfolded the paper all the way and saw one more line at the bottom, written so lightly it looked like the pen was running out of ink. I'm wearing the scarf. It's warm. I pressed the letter against my chest and crouched there on the study floor, unable to stop crying. I don't know how long I stayed there before my legs went numb. I pushed myself up, gripping the bookcase for balance, and moved the cigar box to the desk. I dug my fingers under the felt lining in the bottom of the box, just like he'd said, and pulled out a few folded documents, the deed, some certificates of deposit, and a business card. The card was simple. White, black type, Daniel Morris, Certified Public Accountant. On the back, in my grandfather's handwriting, this kid is solid. I checked my phone. Past 4 in the afternoon. The sky outside was gray and the snow was starting up again. I packed everything from the cigar box into a canvas tote, pulled the study door shut behind me, and went down the stairs. That night, back in my apartment, I read the letter and the journal over and over until I'd memorized whole passages. Sometime after midnight I pulled out my laptop and searched for Daniel Morris. I found his office address and phone number. I looked up estate attorneys in Flint, and when Hamilton's name appeared, I clicked through. The website said he'd been practicing for over 30 years, specializing in estates and family disputes. Buried in his testimonials was a note from a William Harrison, dated last fall. My grandfather had found me a lawyer before he even told me he was sick. I leaned back against the headboard, clutching my phone, staring at the ceiling. Two voices were wrestling in my head. One whispered, "Let it go, sell the house and walk away, don't let them drag you down." The other one said, "Why should I? I didn't do anything wrong. Why do I have to be the one to disappear?" I rolled onto my side and thought about the line in my grandfather's journal, "Don't carry their garbage for them." The next morning, I called Hamilton's office. A receptionist answered. I told her I was William Harrison's granddaughter and I needed to make an appointment about an estate matter. She put me on hold for half a minute, then came back and said Hamilton could see me that afternoon. I was in his office at 2 o'clock. He was older than my grandfather had been, maybe early 70s, with gray hair and gold-rimmed glasses. His office was small but neatly organized. The first thing he said to me was, "Your grandfather talked about you. He said you were a good kid." I opened my mouth but nothing came out. Hamilton opened a drawer and pulled out a manila folder, sliding it across the desk to me. "This is the will he drafted last August. The original was submitted to the probate court 3 days after he passed. But he told me that when you came, I should ask you one thing first. Do you want the house?" "What do you mean?" "He left you 2 options." Hamilton leaned back in his chair. "If your parents didn't make trouble, you could inherit the house and keep it or sell it, your choice. But if they challenged the will, and I believe his exact words were, 'Those two will definitely make trouble,' he authorized me to use their financial history with him as a defense. He said you should decide." I ran my finger over the will. My grandfather's signature was at the bottom of the last page, dated August 15, 2021. The handwriting was steady. Firm. Next to it, a note in his own words, "I sign this document voluntarily, of sound mind and under no duress." "I want to go to court," I said. "They've already approached me. They're going to fight for the house." Hamilton nodded like he'd expected that. "I'll file the will with the court for probate. Meanwhile, go see Daniel Morris. I'll need copies of whatever he's got. Your grandfather had him organize the financial records, and those are going to be critical if this goes to trial." I took the list of documents Hamilton needed and drove straight to Daniel's office. His firm was tucked into a narrow side street downtown. The storefront was modest but the inside was immaculate. Daniel himself was in his early 30s, slim, with wire-rimmed glasses and a pale blue button-down. He stood up and reached across the desk as soon as I gave my name. "Cora Harrison? Your grandfather talked about you constantly." He pulled a thick file box from his cabinet and opened the lid. Inside were 5 labeled folders, 2016 to 2017, 2018 to 2019, 2020, 2021, and property. "These are the records your grandfather asked me to compile. Every dollar your parents withdrew from him over the last 6 years, with supporting documents. I indexed everything by date and amount." He was very specific about making it easy to understand. I opened the first folder. There was a summary sheet with 3 columns, date, amount, and remarks. The remarks had been typed into a professional format, but the content was unmistakable, claimed for home repairs, actually used for vehicle purchase. Stated as educational expense for child, no corresponding school payment on record. Requested for emergency medical bills, subsequent review found no medical costs. Your parents paid back exactly one of these, $1,200 in 2019, Daniel said, tapping the table. Everything else. Never repaid. No. Daniel turned to the final page of the summary. Total, $47,600. Plus one more major item. He pulled out a separate file. The down payment on their house. From 30 years ago. I blinked. The down payment? That's from forever ago. The transfer record still exists. Daniel slid a faded photocopy of a bank receipt across the desk. Your grandfather never filed this as a gift. Legally, it could be classified as an interest-free loan. When he asked me to look into it, he said, save it. Might come in handy. I stared at the number on the receipt. $32,000. In the late 80s, that was enough for half a small house in Flint. My parents had never once mentioned it. Your grandfather thought of everything, Daniel said, closing the file box. He wasn't in great shape when he came to me, but his mind was crystal clear. He said, I probably won't make it to the end of the case, but you hang on to these for my granddaughter. She'll come find you. My grip tightened on my bag. Can those records be used in court? Yes. Daniel nodded. Every transaction is backed by bank statements, not just verbal claims. I've already spoken with counsel. If Hamilton plays it right, these materials will hold up perfectly. I stood up and hefted the file box into my arms. It was heavy. Thank you. Don't thank me. Your grandfather already paid for my time. He said the rest was on me. That night I laid out every document on my bedroom floor, the deed, the certificates, the bank records, the property receipt, and the journal. I sat in the middle of the mess, reading them one by one, watching the pattern assemble itself. While he was dying in a hospital bed, my grandfather had been organizing every important thing he owned. The house. The money. The debts that were never meant to be paid back. He'd turned all of it into paper. He knew everything, but while he was alive he never said a harsh word about it to me. He carried it alone. He kept my path clear. All the way to the end, he was my shield. And what had my parents been doing? On the day of his funeral, they were in the Caribbean. I remembered the photo I'd seen on Laura's feed. White sand. Cocktails. A sunset. The caption, enjoying the best days of our lives. 9 exclamation marks, each one a needle in my eyes. At that exact moment I'd been sitting alone in the hallway of the Flint funeral home, shaking in the cold, waiting for someone to tell me when I could say goodbye. My phone buzzed and died and buzzed again. None of those notifications were from them. They never asked. Not once. Not about how he suffered, not about who was with him at the end, not about what the funeral cost or whether they could help. The only thing they cared about was how much the house was worth. I lay back on the carpet and stared at the crack in the ceiling. And I made my decision. Over the next week, I went to work during the day and spent my evenings at Hamilton's office, going over every piece of evidence. The old lawyer looked through Daniel's records and let out a low whistle. Your grandfather was more thorough than most lawyers I know. If he'd practiced law, I'd be out of a job. He reorganized everything into a formal evidentiary chain, 3 copies, 1 for the court, 1 for himself, 1 for me. My parents weren't idle either. Someone in the family must have tipped them off that I'd been to see Hamilton. Laura called several times. I didn't answer. Then the text started, Cora, let's talk about this properly, escalating to, don't force us to go the legal route. I didn't reply to a single one. Mark showed up in person. I came home one night to find him leaning against the entrance of my building, smoking. There were at least 4 butts on the ground at his feet. He straightened up when he saw me, stubbed out the cigarette, and said, "Cora." "Dad." I stopped a few feet away. "Your mother asked me to come talk about the house." He rubbed his hands together. It was freezing and he didn't have gloves. "I was thinking, maybe we don't have to go to court over this. We're family, right? We can work something out." I looked at his face. It hadn't changed much, just a little softer in the jaw, a few more pounds. I'd always thought of my father as a decent but absent kind of person. Now I knew he was worse. He'd known how sick my grandfather was and he'd gone on vacation anyway. "Work what out?" I said. "Just how to split the property." He scuffed the toe of his shoe against the sidewalk. "You're a young woman, you don't need a big old house like that. We could sell it and split the money. Fair for everyone. The house is mine. Granddad left it to me. The will isn't necessarily. The will was signed by my grandfather, witnessed by a lawyer, and filed with the court." I cut in. "If you don't like it, you can sue." Mark's eyebrows drew together. "Cora, why do you have to be so difficult? That was my father's house. I'm his son. I should get the bulk of it. You're just a... You didn't take care of him when he was alive," I said. "You don't get to take his things when he's dead." "Dad. Do you really not see how wrong that is?" Mark's mouth opened and closed. He fumbled for another cigarette, lit it, took half a drag, and said, "I don't know, talk to your mother. She's the one who said this can't just be left alone." He walked off into the dark. I watched him shrink down the street, his shoulders hunched against the cold. He'd come to negotiate, and within 5 minutes he'd passed responsibility to someone else. 40-odd years old, and his first instinct was still, ask your mother. The lawsuit came faster than I expected. The summons arrived at my office. A clerk handed me a thick envelope. I opened it in the break room and read the letterhead, Flint County Circuit Court. The plaintiffs were Laura Harrison and Mark Harrison. The defendant was me. Cause of action, will contest. They'd hired a local lawyer named Philip West, who specialized in estate disputes, specifically cases involving undue influence by younger family members. I took a photo of the summons and sent it to Hamilton. He replied within minutes, "I expected this." West has a standard playbook: emotional appeals first, then attack the validity of the will. Brace yourself. But the evidence is on our side. He can't beat what we have. The trial was scheduled for late February. I had 3 weeks. I went to work, came home, slept. On weekends I drove out to the old house to clean. I turned the heat back on, boxed up my grandfather's tools one by one. He'd used that set for 40 years. The wrenches were worn smooth. I kept the largest adjustable wrench and put it on my nightstand. It didn't do anything, but it felt right to have it there. A week before the trial, I visited Daniel for one last review. He went through every document, checked every page, and then reached into the bottom drawer of his desk and handed me a single sheet of paper. "Your grandfather gave me this on his last visit," Daniel said. "He said if you decided to go to court, you'd need it." I looked down at the paper. It was a handwritten affidavit, in my grandfather's neatest script, the writing he used when he was feeling relatively strong. I, William Harrison, being of sound mind and acting under no coercion, authorize Daniel Morris to disclose any and all financial records pertaining to my children, Laura Harrison and Mark Harrison, in the event of any legal dispute regarding my estate. I affirm that all such records are factual and accurate, and I accept full legal responsibility for their disclosure. Signed and dated. 3 full months before he died. He was thinking 2 steps ahead, Daniel said. This proves he was lucid when he made the will, and that he excluded your parents intentionally. Not because of any undue influence from you. I folded the affidavit and put it in my bag. My grandfather had cleared every obstacle while he was still in a hospital bed. I wouldn't be surprised if he'd spent every lucid moment of those last 2 months planning for me. Thank you, Daniel. Don't thank me. Your grandfather was a good man. He closed the file box. When he came to me, he said, I'm not going to be around much longer. But my granddaughter is young, and I can't let anyone walk all over her. I held my bag tight and didn't let myself cry. The morning of the trial, Flint was covered in fresh snow. I wore a black turtleneck and a gray blazer, hair pulled back, no makeup. Hamilton met me at the courthouse steps, looking more serious than usual in his navy suit. You don't need to say much in there. Leave it to me. I nodded. I was nervous, my heart was slamming against my ribs, my palms damp. But I thought about my grandfather, about that blue journal, about him lying in a hospital bed and planning all of this for me. I couldn't afford to be weak. The courtroom was modest. 10 or 12 people in the gallery. I spotted a few of my grandfather's old neighbors, and Aunt Margaret in the back row, her expression unreadable. At the plaintiff's table sat my parents and their lawyer, Philip West. My mother wore a dark blue suit, her hair pinned up in a careful twist, her makeup flawless. She looked the part, pale, red-eyed, like a grieving mother being wronged by an ungrateful child. My father sat beside her in a tie so tight he kept tugging at the collar. His hands were restless, rubbing his thighs. Seeing them there, dressed for a performance, made my stomach twist. They hadn't attended the funeral. They'd been on a beach in the Caribbean. Now they were here, playing the role of devoted children. The judge banged the gavel and the trial began. Philip West rose first. He walked to the center of the courtroom, cleared his throat, and spoke in a measured, polished tone. His case had 3 main pillars. 1, that William Harrison was elderly and ill when he signed the will, raising serious questions about his capacity. 2, that a will leaving everything to a granddaughter and entirely disinheriting his children was inherently suspicious and contrary to normal family expectations. And 3, that the granddaughter, Cora Harrison, had ample opportunity to exert undue influence during her grandfather's vulnerable final months. I dug my nails into my palms when he said that. Undue influence? I didn't even know my grandfather had cancer until near the end. He'd hidden it from me to keep me from worrying. What influence could I possibly have exerted? But I kept my mouth shut. Hamilton had told me to stay quiet. Hamilton rose next. He moved slowly to the center of the courtroom, inclined his head toward the judge, and opened a clear plastic file holder, the one I'd seen him pack that morning with all of our evidence. Your Honor, the defense will present 3 sets of evidence. His voice was calm, unhurried. First, medical evaluations from William Harrison's treating physician at Flint General Hospital, covering the period immediately before and after the will was signed. Dr. John Carter's report confirms that on the date of execution, Mr. Harrison was alert, oriented, and fully capable of understanding and disposing of his property. Second, Hamilton drew a thick stack of papers from the file. Mr. Harrison's bank statements from the final 6 years of his life, along with complete records of all withdrawals made by the plaintiffs from the decedent's accounts. Every transfer is supported by corresponding documentation. The total amount is $47,600, none of which has ever been repaid. In addition, He paused and turned a page. There is a down payment on a house, made 30 years ago by William Harrison on behalf of the plaintiffs, in the amount of $32,000. This transfer was never documented as a gift. Legally, it can be treated as an interest-free loan. My mother's face went white. She whipped her head toward my father, who wouldn't meet her eyes. Philip West rose. Your Honor, this is irrelevant to the will contest. I'll decide what's relevant, the judge said, eyeing West over his spectacles. Continue, Mr. Hamilton. What's the connection between the house down payment and the will dispute? The connection is the plaintiff's established pattern of behavior, Hamilton said. Over decades, they repeatedly took money from the decedent and never repaid it. That pattern is directly relevant to their credibility and their claim to be the proper beneficiaries of Mr. Harrison's estate. That's enough. My mother's voice cut through the courtroom, high and sharp. You're digging up old family matters in a courtroom. Those were gifts. My father-in-law gave them to us. Mrs. Harrison. The judge's gavel cracked the air. You will remain silent. Mr. Hamilton, proceed to your third piece of evidence. Hamilton reached into the file and drew out the final piece. A blue journal, its cover scuffed and faded. Third, the decedent's handwritten journal, spanning 2017 to 2021. These entries reflect the decedent's contemporaneous accounts of his financial interactions with his children, his medical condition, and his repeated, unambiguous intentions regarding his estate. The handwriting and content are consistent with Mr. Harrison's known documentation. I request the court's permission to read selected passages that are directly relevant to this case. The courtroom went still. Philip West sat back down, frowning. The judge examined the journal briefly and nodded. Hamilton opened the journal and began to read. His voice was moderate, but the room was so quiet that every word carried to the back of the gallery. February 14, 2018. Laura said the furnace broke and asked to borrow $2,000. She said she'd pay me back next month. I transferred it. Drove by their house today and saw a brand new car in the driveway. Furnace. Right. I saw my mother's spine stiffen. March 2019. Mark came by. Said he needed a new car and asked me to chip in $20,000. I told him I'd just paid Cora's tuition and didn't have it. He left without even saying goodbye. My father's head dropped. August 2020. Laura heard I was sick and came to the hospital. 10 minutes in, she started asking about the house. Dad, this place is worth something now. You should write a will so there's no fighting. I told her I'd already written one. She asked what was in it. I said guess. She turned green. Someone in the gallery gasped. Aunt Margaret's mouth had tightened into a thin line. January 2021. Chemo isn't working well. Doctor told me to prepare myself. I didn't tell Cora. She's looking for a job and has enough stress. I called Daniel and asked him to come over. August 2021. Changed my will again. The lawyer asked if I was sure. I said I'd been sure of two things in my life, marrying Irene, and this decision. After Irene died, Cora is my only family. Her parents don't deserve to be called that. When Hamilton read that line, the courtroom was so silent I could hear the water moving in the heating pipes. I sat at the defense table, digging my nails into my palms, forcing the tears back. November 2021. Cora visited today. Brought chicken soup, said she'd simmered it for 4 hours. I took one sip. Too salty. But I finished every drop. She left and I cried. I never failed anyone except this girl. She got stuck with those parents, and when I'm gone she'll have no one. I left her everything I had. The house, the money, Daniel's files. Enough for her to get by. Hamilton closed the journal and turned to the judge. Your Honor, these entries establish 3 things clearly. First, that the decedent was of sound mind when he made these decisions. Second, that the disposition of his estate was his own long-considered, repeatedly confirmed intention, free of any outside interference or undue influence. And third, that the plaintiff's financial dealings with the decedent were extensive and unrepaid, undermining their claim to be his rightful heirs. Therefore, the plaintiff's challenge to the will is without merit. The judge removed his glasses, polished them slowly, and put them back on. He looked at the plaintiff's table. Mrs. Harrison, Mr. Harrison. Do you acknowledge the authenticity of these journal entries? My mother didn't speak. Her lips were trembling, but no words came out. My father raised his head and said, his voice like gravel, yes. Philip West started to say something, but the judge raised his hand. The court will take a recess until 3 o'clock. I'll issue my ruling after we reconvene. The gavel fell. I sat at the defense table, my legs trembling. Hamilton patted my shoulder. You did fine, he said quietly. I nodded. My throat was too tight to speak. During the recess, I went to the restroom and splashed cold water on my face. In the mirror, my eyes were red but my mouth was trying to curve upward. I took a few deep breaths. When I came out, Aunt Margaret was waiting in the hallway. She was clutching her purse with both hands. She saw me and froze. We stared at each other for a few seconds before she spoke. Cora, your mother. Aunt Margaret, I said. If you're going to speak on her behalf, save your breath. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Finally she sighed. No. I wasn't going to speak for her. I didn't know. Before your grandfather passed, she told me everyone in the family had agreed about the house. I didn't know she'd borrowed so much. I didn't know she never came back to see him. I watched her. Aunt Margaret wasn't a bad person. She just believed whatever Laura told her. Can you at least talk to her? She added. Aunt Margaret. I met her eyes. My grandfather was sick for 2 years. How many times did she come back? She didn't even come to the funeral. Do you really think that's something we can sit down and talk about? Aunt Margaret didn't answer. She pressed her lips together, gave my arm a pat, and walked away. At 3 o'clock, the judge reconvened and delivered his ruling. The court has considered the evidence in full. Plaintiff's claim that the will is invalid is denied. The will of William Harrison, dated August 15, 2021, is hereby declared valid and enforceable. All property specified in the will, including the real property located on Oak Street and all financial assets held in the decedent's name, shall pass to the named beneficiary, Cora Harrison, in accordance with the will's terms. Plaintiff's claim is dismissed with prejudice. Costs are assessed against the plaintiffs. The judge looked at my mother's table one last time and added, Mrs. Harrison, the law protects the wishes of the testator, not the expectations of the heirs. My mother shot to her feet. The scraping of her chair was loud in the silence. That's not fair. He was his son. The gavel cracked again. The court has ruled. Plaintiffs and gallery will remain orderly. Philip West pulled them both back down. My father never lifted his head. As my mother was guided out by her lawyer, she passed within a few feet of me. She turned and looked at me. That look had everything in it, fury, resentment, and something else that almost made me laugh. It was the look of someone who genuinely believed the world had wronged her by not letting her get away with it. I stayed where I was and watched them go. Her heels clicked against the corridor floor, just the way my grandfather had written. The gallery started to empty. Several of my grandfather's old neighbors came by and patted my shoulder. They didn't say much, just a firm squeeze, like they were doing it on his behalf. I stood on the courthouse steps and watched the snow drift down from a gray sky. Hamilton packed up his files and told me he'd handle the final paperwork. I lingered on the steps after he'd gone. The neighbors had dispersed. Aunt Margaret was gone. I saw my parents' car in the parking lot across the street. My mother was in the passenger seat, wiping her face. My father sat behind the wheel, staring straight ahead. I didn't walk over. I turned and went to my own car. The snow crunched under my boots, the wind bit at my neck, but my body felt warm. The night the verdict came down, I sat on my bed and read my grandfather's journal one more time, from cover to cover. By the time I finished, it was late. I closed the blue cover and set it on the nightstand, next to the wrench. My phone buzzed. Daniel, heard from Hamilton. Congratulations. I typed back, thanks, and added a smiley face. A minute later he replied, your grandfather would have opened a bottle of whiskey to celebrate. I smiled at the screen. My grandfather loved whiskey, especially when he was happy. When I got good grades, he drank. On my birthdays, he drank. When I got an internship, he insisted on a toast. He'd sit on his old couch, face flushed, and tell me stories from his mechanic days, the same ones I'd heard 100 times, but he told them with such light in his eyes that I never tired of them. I turned off the light and lay in the dark, staring up at the ceiling. I thought about my grandfather in those final months, going through chemo alone, meeting with lawyers and accountants alone, writing that journal alone. How did he keep it together? Was he scared? I remembered a visit to the hospital. He was propped up in bed, reading a newspaper. I asked what he was looking at, and he turned it around for me, a local piece about a new walking path being built on Oak Street. He said, when they finish it, I'll push your grandmother's wheelchair up there to enjoy the sun. I said, Grandma's been gone a long time. He blinked, then laughed and said, getting old, memories going. Now I understood. His memory was fine. He remembered everything, every dollar, every phone call, every cold word. He just didn't want me to know. To me, he was always the same cheerful old man. Don't worry about me, I'm fine. Don't come visit so much, you'll miss work. He shielded me the best way he could, all the way to the end. I rolled over and pressed my face into the pillow. That night I dreamed about him. He was sitting in the wicker chair on the old house's porch, soaking up the sun. I walked over and he turned to me, his face creased with that familiar smile. Cora, you're here. We're having beef stew tonight. I crouched beside him, resting my head against his knee the way I did when I was small. He said, why are you crying? I said, I'm not crying. It's just the wind. I woke up with the pillow wet. Outside, the snow had stopped and weak winter light was pushing through the clouds. I sat up, wiped my face, put the journal and letter away, and got ready for work. Life goes on. For 2 weeks after the verdict, I worked through the formalities of the inheritance with Hamilton's guidance. The house was legally mine. The savings accounts were transferred. I didn't rush to sell anything. First I hired someone to thoroughly clean the old house, had the heating system serviced, and donated whatever furniture my grandfather wouldn't have needed anymore. I kept the wicker chair and moved it to the back porch. Spring was coming. I could sit there and get some sun when it got warm. My parents went quiet after the verdict, but I knew that wouldn't last. And it didn't. Less than a week later, Laura started calling. I didn't answer. She switched to texts, the tone shifting from, "Come over for dinner sometime, sweetheart," to, "Why are you hiding from us?" to, "Are you planning to cut us off forever?" All in less than 48 hours. I didn't reply to any of them. But I couldn't leave things in limbo. I consulted Hamilton, and he recommended sending a formal written notice stating that the inheritance had been settled and that I wouldn't entertain further discussions on the subject. "Paper trail," he said. "Covers your back." I drafted a short letter, just a few sentences. "The estate matter has been resolved per the court's judgment. Please refrain from contacting me further regarding this issue." I copied Daniel on it. That letter set off a bomb. My mother called 14 times. I didn't pick up. Finally, she called from my father's phone, and I answered without thinking. She screamed into the receiver, "Cora, what is wrong with you? Sending that letter? Are you seriously trying to cut your own parents out of your life?" I held the phone away from my ear and waited for her to finish. "Mom," I said, "the estate has been settled. There's nothing left to discuss. What happened to you? Who taught you to talk to your mother like this? I changed your diapers, I fed you, I raised you, and now you think you can just..." I listened to her go on, alternating between yelling and crying. It was the same script I'd heard my whole life. "I'm your mother, I sacrificed for you, how can you be so ungrateful?" She never asked how I was doing. Whether I was eating well. If I needed anything. Not once. "Mom," I said. "Where were you when Granddad was sick?" The line went quiet. "Where were you the day he died?" Silence. "Is there anything else?" "Because I have to go." "Cora." Her voice cracked. "You're burning bridges and you don't even see it. Fine. You got the house. You got the money. But you owe us. You owe your mother and father. We can't go back to our friends looking like the bad guys." "Mom." I took a deep breath. Those account records didn't come from nowhere. They came from you. From the money you took from Granddad. If the people in your life think less of you now, that's on you, not me. She stopped talking. I heard my father murmur something, and then his voice came on the line. "Cora, listen. Your mother's just upset. Don't take it personally. The house stuff is settled now, and we accept that. But the thing with your Aunt Margaret, I mean, the friends, the group chat, the..." "Dad. What are you talking about?" He hesitated. "Someone took screenshots of your mother's social media, the vacation posts, and sent them to the family group chat. And the court document got leaked somehow. Aunt Margaret's friends have been talking. Your mother's embarrassed." "I don't know who leaked it," I said. "But nothing in those documents was false." He swallowed audibly. "I know. I just thought maybe you could explain to everyone that it was all a misunderstanding? Just to smooth things over." I stood in my kitchen, looking out the window at the slush melting on the street. They'd lost the house. They'd lost the money. They'd lost the lawsuit. And the thing they cared about most was their reputation. "Dad," I said. "I'm not lying for you." I hung up and stood there for a long time. Then I pulled up the screenshots I'd saved from Laura's social media, the white sand, the cocktails, the sunset, the 9 exclamation points. I stared at them for a moment and then sent them all to Daniel with a question: could these be useful? He replied almost immediately, depends how you want to use them. They'd be effective publicly. I didn't answer. I put the phone down and went back to making dinner. Things accelerated faster than I expected. About 3 weeks after the verdict, Aunt Margaret called me. I braced myself for another appeal to just talk to your mother, but she cut straight to it. Cora, I read the excerpts from your grandfather's journal. Is it true your mother didn't visit him for 2 years? Yes. A long silence. And on the day he passed. Caribbean. She posted photos. Check her feed yourself. She might not have scrubbed it yet. Aunt Margaret was silent again, and then said, I see, and hung up. The next day, my cousin Rachel sent me a voice message. I played it and heard her voice tight with excitement. Cora, you won't believe this. My mom called your mom last night. She asked why she never came back to visit Granddad, and your mom said he never told her how sick he was. Then my mom asked why she didn't answer his calls, and your mom had nothing to say. I listened again, not sure how to feel. Rachel followed up with another message: the group chat is blowing up. Someone leaked that vacation screenshot. It came from one of your mom's friends. Now everyone's talking. She locked her account yesterday, but the screenshots are all over. I scrolled through screenshots Rachel had forwarded. There were over 30 people in the family group chat. The latest message from Laura was a defensive post: the estate matter was resolved in court and we've accepted that. But the malicious gossip spreading about me is something else entirely. The first reply was from Aunt Margaret. What gossip? I'm asking you plain. Your father was sick for 2 years. When did you visit him? When? No one replied after that. Laura didn't post again. I put my phone down and leaned back in my chair. My mother's worst fear had come true. She'd lost her standing in the family. And I knew, deep down, that all of this had been made possible by my grandfather's journal. He'd never complained to anyone while he was alive. He'd carried it all alone. Now that he was gone, his own words had come to light. That weekend I went to the old house to sweep and tidy. I sat on the wicker chair in the backyard and let the sun warm my face. Then I remembered something he'd written in the journal, a note about wanting to donate a couple of benches to the little park at the Oak Street intersection. He said the old ones were rotting and the seniors had nowhere to sit. He'd talked about it for years but never had the money. He'd always prioritized my tuition. I'd made a mental note when I read that passage. Now that I was in a better place financially, I could do something about it. I called the city parks department to ask about donations. They explained the procedure. I reached out to a carpenter friend and priced custom benches. I decided to donate 5. On the back of each one, I had a plaque installed: William Harrison, a man who liked to sit here in the sun. Installation day fell on a Friday afternoon. It was starting to warm up. The old maple at Oak Street was breaking into new green leaves. The workers were digging post holes and pouring cement when a white-haired woman with a dog came shuffling over. She asked who had donated the benches. I told her it was my grandfather. She said she remembered William. He used to sit here with his paper all the time. Haven't seen him in a while. I thought he'd moved. I told her he passed away. She paused, then said, shame. He was a decent man. Then she walked on with her dog. I sat on the new bench, watching cars pass, the sun warming my shoulders. I imagined him sitting there, legs crossed, reading glasses on his nose, a dog waiting for him to come home. I pulled out my phone and sent Daniel a photo. Benches are in. Come see them when you're free." He replied with a thumbs up. The real climax came 2 months after the verdict. I was at work when Daniel called me with an unusual edge in his voice. "Cora, your father came to see me today." I froze. What did he want? He asked for a copy of the financial records. He said he's filing for divorce. What? Daniel sighed. He said he's had enough. Laura blamed him for everything, for not coming back to see his father, for losing the court case. They've been fighting for weeks. He asked me for an itemized record to use in the separation. I gripped the phone, trying to process it. My father was leaving my mother? It felt surreal. Did you give it to him? No. The records belong to you. He asked if he could meet you in person. No. I'll tell him you're not available. I sat at my desk for a while after I hung up. My mind churned with fragments, childhood dinners, family trips, and then my grandfather's journal entry. She got stuck with those parents. Eventually I let it go. Their marriage, their fight, none of that was my business anymore. I didn't need to be dragged into it. My grandfather had been right about one thing: hate is exhausting. But caring about people who've never cared about you is even more exhausting. Over the next few weeks, I heard bits and pieces from Rachel. My father and mother never went through with the divorce, but they lived apart for a while. He moved in with an old coworker. Eventually my mother gave in, and he came back. But the family knew the whole story now. Laura's old arrogance had evaporated. Rachel reported, she's been a ghost in the group chat. Before, she'd post about vacations and new purchases every holiday. This birthday she didn't post anything. I said, "Okay." Rachel asked, "Cora, do you hate her?" I thought about it. Not hate, I don't think. She just doesn't matter that way anymore. Rachel was quiet for a minute, then sent a voice message, her voice shaky. "I'm glad you feel that way. I was worried you'd get stuck." I smiled. Stuck? My grandfather left me something more valuable than money. He told me not to waste my life on hate. And I'm not going to. The whole thing really ended that summer, about 6 months after the verdict. I sold the old house that June. I hadn't been actively marketing it, but a young couple with 2 kids approached through the realtor. They loved the yard. I went to sign the papers on a warm afternoon. The oak tree was thick with green leaves, and the roses my grandfather had planted were still blooming, bright red, stubborn. The buyers were friendly. The woman asked, "Did you grow up here?" "Most of my life," I said. "My grandfather's house." She nodded without pressing further. When I handed over the keys, I felt no sharp loss. Some things you can't pack in boxes, but they stay with you anyway. The memories travel wherever you go. I put the sale proceeds into a term deposit. I kept my rental apartment for the moment, no rush. Flint summers get hot, so I bought a used air conditioner. Every night after work, I'd come home, turn it on, eat noodles, and watch shows. Life went back to ordinary. My father called me one more time, late at night. His voice was raw, worn, like he'd been drinking. "Cora," he said. "I'm sorry. I didn't say anything." He repeated himself, over and over, stumbling through apologies. "I'm sorry for everything. I'm sorry to your grandfather. I'm sorry we weren't there." I listened. I thought about the times when I was young, when he'd take me fishing, when he'd lift me onto his shoulders. That was before he met my mother. He hadn't always been the person he became. But all of that felt far away now. When he finally stopped, I said, "I know." And I hung up. I didn't say, "It's fine." It wasn't. I didn't say, "I forgive you." I wasn't there yet. But I'd stopped hating him. The exhaustion in his voice when he apologized, it reminded me of my grandfather's line in the journal, "My biggest failure was not raising them better." Some things break and they stay broken. It doesn't mean you're obligated to hate them forever, but it doesn't mean you can fix them either. They just are what they are. One evening that autumn, I walked past the small park at Oak Street. The 5 benches were lined up neatly along the path. An old man sat on one of them, reading a newspaper, his silhouette caught in the slanting orange light. I glanced at the plaque on the back as I passed. William Harrison's name gleamed in the fading sun. I took a few steps, stopped, and looked back. The old man turned a page, crossed his legs, adjusted his reading glasses. In profile, he looked just like my grandfather. I smiled to myself and kept walking. The sun was setting, the sky streaked with orange and pink. Flint didn't get many sunsets like this. My grandfather would have said, "Tomorrow'll be a good day. You should get out." I pulled out my phone and typed a message to the old number. I knew he wouldn't see it. "Papa. It's a beautiful evening." I pocketed the phone and walked home through the fading light.